Hello everyone and welcome to another video. As the name suggests, the scenario Alpine Adventures is all about doing fun things in the mountains. That's great and all, but I'm Dutch and we don't do mountains here, so what I want to do is flatten this park as quickly as I can. This is going to cost an absolute ton of money, so the name of the game for this challenge is to make as much money as quickly as possible. I could have meticulously planned this beforehand for maximum efficiency, but I wanted to see what I would do if I went into this without a plan other than make mountain go away. After having removed the already existing chairlift that we obviously won't need anymore once it's flat, my first instinct was to build small Roto Drops. We charge for the rides in this scenario, so we want the most profitable ride available. The current fastest speedrun of this scenario uses these Roto Drops, and I know by heart that the one with 3 tower pieces is the most profitable. After having built one of these and a food stall, we can run all advertisement campaigns in order to maximize the rate that new guests are spawning at. One isn't enough, so I built more Roto Drops, and a few later it starts to rain, and this is a problem as guests will not go on the ride when it rains. Not all problems have solutions, but luckily this one does, and that solution is a flower bed on top of the Roto Drop. You see, when enough of a ride is covered by ground, scenery or path, it counts as an indoor ride, which guests will go on in the rain, so a little scenery item on top of the Roto Drop makes them immune to rain. So far we've been charging $10 for the rides, but I'm not sure that's actually the maximum. I just kind of set it at the start and went with it, so let's do some testing. It seems that the maximum they will pay is €11.40, so let's charge €11 for all of them, as that's quick to do and leaves a little bit of leeway in case this one has some higher stats due to well-positioned path or something, I don't know. While we continue to build more rides, we also need to make sure we have plenty of stalls. Food and drinks of course, but also utilities, and of those the cash machine is the most important. Guests will go broke super duper quickly with €11 rides, it only takes a couple of them, so there need to be plenty of opportunities to stock up again. Not all Roto Drops are that expensive though, as sometimes I forget to raise the price from the standard $2 up to 11. Roto Drop 9, for example, is still at $2, even though I built it more than 2 weeks ago. The guests are also not really helping, as they're not telling me about it, and instead they're sneakingly abusing this oversight. I wonder how long it will take me to realize that I forgot to change the ticket price and finally raise it up. By now, almost 2 months into the run, we have unlocked the Corkcrew coaster, which means that we can finally build the famous micro corkscrew design. But before we get to building these, we complete the scenario goal. This goal is rather appropriately a ride ticket income goal, and our nearly 25,000 in April completely crushes the €7,000 goal. Our goal for this video though has only scarcely begun. I have flattened a little bit to make space for the rides, but that's only a tiny amount of the map. Let's finish up our corkscrew coasters. I don't actually think this ride is better for making money than the Roto Drop though. Its maximum throughput is about 25% higher at roughly 2,500 versus 2,000 guests per hour, but its ticket price will be only €7 compared to the 11 of the Roto Drop, which more than offsets that. However, while the Roto Drop only attracts 45 guests to the park, the corkscrew will attract 100, and that is gonna make sure that our soft guest cap will stay above our guest count, and thus that our natural guest generation speed will not slow down. Just like with the Roto Drops, I'm putting flower beds above the corkscrew coasters to protect them from the rain. We don't need quite as many as I put here, I mean 2 of them aren't even above the ride at all, but apparently I thought this looked nice or something, which is why I kept doing it. Anyway, after having built 6 of them, we can continue with more Roto Drops and the occasional batch of 6 corkscrews. Just over half a year in, on July 11th, I finally noticed that the ticket price of Roto Drop 9 was still just $2, and I raised it to the proper 11. Immediately after this, I noticed that there were a lot of guests wandering about at the front of the park, while the back was nearly empty. This is not optimal at all, so I tried to mitigate it with some no entry signs. These don't make it impossible to go to the front, but they do encourage guests to walk the other way and hopefully make them spread out a bit more. At the start of August, we run into a new issue. The ride values are dropping. Rides stay considered brand new for 5 months, after which their value, and as a result their maximum maximum ticket price drops by 20%. The usual response to this is to lower the ticket prices, but that's not gonna fly here. We want money, as much of it as possible. So instead, I'm going to refurbish every ride in the park when it turns 5 months old, so that we can keep charging 11 euros for this shitty little ride. As we continue to expand the park, I also built some souvenir stalls in order to make even more money. Just like with the food and drink stalls I built earlier, the prices will be very high, even higher than the usual maximum for these items. That is fine, because there is still a chance that guests will buy overpriced items, and the happier the guests are, the more extra they are potentially willing to spend on food and souvenirs. Oh, and of course I also had 20 euro umbrellas from the start, which gives a nice income boost when it rains, which it frequently does here. Now, one downside of using the Roto Drops is that they have quite a high nausea rating of 5.34, and that nausea rating is producing a lot of puke. This requires more handymen, which costs more money, and any puke that doesn't get cleaned up immediately will also make the guests unhappy. At the time of playing, I didn't realize this yet, but this nausea is a bigger problem than just the puke it causes. If a guest is too ill, it won't go on any rides, which means they're not spending money. So how many guests are saying they feel ill? First, let's see what's normal. In this park with a lot of big roller coasters, about 10% of the 2150 guests are thinking they are sick or very sick. And in this very blue, more varied fungus woods, it's less than 3%, so that 10% of the coaster park is already pretty high. What is it in our partially flattened Alpine Adventures? More than 20%, which is absolutely ridiculous. There are so many guests walking around that just will not go on any rides for a while until their stomach has calmed down, so maybe the Roto Drops weren't the best choice of ride. Past me didn't realize that yet, so more Roto Drops it is, and by the end of year 1 we have 50 of them, along with 12 micro Corkcrew coasters. We're making over 80,000 a month from ride tickets now, and we flattened a significant amount of land, mostly just to make space for more park. The guest count is a bit lower than I expected, at less than 1700. Over 2300 of them have entered the park, which means that quite a significant portion has already left, maybe partially due to all the puke and nausea. In the second year we should be able to flatten much more, since we start the year with a big profitable park instead of from scratch, and we will of course only keep expanding it and making even more money. At this point the number of sick and very sick guests has reached about 25%. This is so insane that the most popular thing in the park is not a ride, but instead its first aid stall 1 with about 2500 guests an hour. I finally decided to build some benches in the park. Usually I built these by default, but I decided to not do that here because guests will sit on them to consume their food or drink, instead of consuming it while they walk to or queue for the next opportunity to spend money. However, sick guests will also use them to get rid of their nausea quicker, so it's probably a good idea to build some at this point. At the end of March of the second year of the first age, I finally realized that it's probably a good idea to stop building Roto Drops, so after number 57, that's it. The ones that already exist will stay around and will be refurbished when they need to, but no new rides will be Roto Drops, they'll all be micro Corkscrews instead. A little bit later I noticed that quite a few guests were wanting to go home, but apparently couldn't find the park exit. Remember those no entry signs I had put up to disperse the guests throughout the park better? I had taken them down after the dispersing was done thoroughly enough, but later put them back because the front was overcrowded again. However, even though it's technically possible to pathfind your way out of this park, the guests don't seem to be very good at it, so I had to remove the no entry signs to prevent a massive park rating bollocking. 1.5 years into the run, our monthly ride ticket profit eclipses 100,000 euros for the first time, and we've excavated nearly half of the map. Despite some vomity issues, things are progressing quite nicely, and I'm guessing that we're past halfway now, time-wise, as we'll only make even more money in the future. At this point, we have nearly 100 rides, and building more is kind of pointless. The soft guest cap is several times higher than the guest count, there is no overcrowding, and only a couple of rides ever have more than 10 guests at a time in the queue line, so guests aren't spending much unnecessary time waiting around either. More rides would only cost money with things like ride operating costs and more mechanics, so it's a good idea to stop building, which I will not do. Instead, I will build a big fat twister coaster that guests will want to pay 20 bucks for. This will make a lot of money and attract people to the back of the park, taking a load off the few rides at the front that do occasionally get a full queue. The coaster itself is rather simple. It starts with a launched lift hill to make the ride time short and the speed high for a high excitement and intensity rating. After a drop we're going to do interlocking vertical loops for a big excitement bonus, but I really struggled with getting them aligned properly here. I've done this probably at least 100 times before, so I should know how to do it, but for some reason it just took a while to get it right. After that there's a few more twists and turns and another inversion, but then it returns to the station pretty quickly, as it should already be long enough now for the €20 ticket price. All the scenery above the coaster that turns it into an indoor ride and a dummy station for the synchronization bonus allows this ride to have nearly 10 excitement, and we could charge $26 for this if the game allowed us to. This is so much more than 20 that even after the first value drop at 5 months it's still above 20, even if we didn't have that synchronization bonus. Which makes that dummy station completely useless and actually annoying, because every time I use the open all rides button to reopen a bunch of rides I have just refurbished, the game sends me to this thing telling me it cannot be opened because it has no entrance building yet. This annoys me enough that pretty quickly I removed that dummy station again, as it's useless anyway. We don't need that little bit of extra excitement. Speaking of refurbishing, the final ride count is exactly 100, and keeping them all under 5 months old is really quite a task, as on average it's one refurbishment every 20 seconds. I can do it quicker than that if I do it in batches, so it is doable and I have some time to do some other stuff, but it's a lot more work than I expected it to be. At the end of year 2 we have 2,600 guests in the park and a record ride ticket income of €137,000 in a single month. Most of the park is now flat, but between a quarter and a third still being in the shape of this thing they call a mountain. From now on my job is to refurbish rides and lower the land. At the start of April year 3 I noticed that for some reason Roto Drop 57 had broken down and wasn't getting fixed. I immediately realized what the issue was, as earlier the same happened with number 17. The problem is simply that I had forgotten to build an exit path. This isn't actually a problem immediately. Since the empty exit tile is surrounded by path, the guests immediately find their way onto it so they don't get lost. And when the ride turned 5 months old, I just refurbished it and was none the wiser that anything was wrong. However, mechanics prefer entering through the back door, so once it had stopped working, it couldn't be fixed. The timing here wasn't too bad though. It broke down only a few minutes earlier on March 15th, and thanks to a fortunate refurbishing timing I noticed it quickly. We keep making a lot of money and making good progress with annihilating the hills. However, I got a little bit overzealous and lowered a bit of land too much. Not only does this cost extra money, but then I had to spend even more extra money to get it back up to the level of the rest of the park, otherwise it wouldn't be flat. This tiny little slip of the mouse cost me about €97,000, or about 3 weeks of in-game time. Before we lower the last bit of land, let's look at some stats. The most profitable ride in the park is the Twister Coaster, which in a very short amount of time managed to surpass the very old Roto Drops 7 by having about 3 times the hourly profit. The oldest guest still in the park is guest 14, who was here at the very start, but she's not the one who spent the most. That honor goes to guest 21, who has spent over €1,300 in about 2.5 years, or 2 hours and 15 minutes of our real time. His high nausea tolerance allowed him to keep riding these nauseating rides over and over again. This is in sharp contrast with the just €550 of guest 93, who according to the game literally has a non-existent nausea tolerance and thus gets sick every time they get on a Roto Drop. Despite that, they kept trying out new ones, perhaps in the faint hope that now finally it would be okay, but it never was. A month later, near the end of July year 3, we sell the big Twister Coaster for some extra money and are able to finally finish flattening this ferocious foe of a scenario. It took me 2 years and 5 months to acquire all the €1.7 million required to flatten these adventurous Alpine mountains, and we did that with a record ride ticket profit of €153,000 in a single month. But I'm not satisfied. I know I can do this faster. And I will. Actually, not just faster, as during editing I discovered that I forgot this tiny bit of raised land, so my first attempt technically didn't even complete the goal. On my second attempt I will only build micro corkscrew coasters, as they have a very low nausea rating instead of the high one of the Roto Drop. We do have to start with some of the Roto Drops though, as it takes a month to research the corkscrew, but once we have it, all the Roto Drops will be nuked into oblivion. Also, because the ride time is shorter and it takes up less space, guests will spend less time on the ride and less time walking to the next ride compared to the Roto Drops, which both offset a bit of the loss in profit due to a lower ride ticket price. I did go a bit more precise this time as well and charged the absolute maximum of €7.40 instead of just €7 flat. This all may make it even more profitable than the Roto Drops, but I haven't done any proper comparison. Other than that, it's really more of the same, except we make the money we need a bit quicker. In the first attempt we finished year 1 with about 1650 guests and €83,000 of ride ticket profit, whereas here it's 1800 guests and €105,000 of profit. Significantly more. I chose a bit of a friendlier looking scenery piece to make the ride indoor and also didn't build as many of those pieces, making it look a bit nicer. The bright colors of the ride are in case I get nominated for the most dazzling color schemes award, which would boost my natural guest generation by 25% for a while. I didn't end up getting it, but the chance was always there and this didn't cost me any extra money to do. Notice that this time around the park is also much more neatly organized. The first attempt was a mess with all those Roto Drops with a different queue line every time, but now it's very straightforward. This makes for easier pathfinding and probably better guest dispersal, but it also makes it easier for me to build and refurbish these rides in neat batches. 18 of these batches and a most profitable month of €172,000 later, the park is completely flattened at the start of May year 3, almost 3 months quicker than the first attempt. I do wonder though, would it be better to build more of those big €20 roller coasters instead of these small €7 ones? I don't know and I'm not going to find out because I can't be arsed to do this a third time. Just 2 years and 2 months is a pretty good time and I'm happy with it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, you can click here to watch me do a similar thing with Crazy Castle, except the end goes a little bit differently. Thank you all for watching and I will see you in the next video.